Are you bored of the consistent green wave of orcs that seems to just pop up around this time of year? Well, don't worry. Today we're going over two different methods of painting up some Necroks, which are the red-skinned Necron technology wielding orcs that we made up here on the channel. I also just want to quickly point out that normally the Necroks would have a Necron conversion. Every single model in the army has some form of Necron conversion. However, as these are going on a Stomperlith, which is a Necron conversion, I've decided I'm not going to worry about the individual ones on these boys. The reason I'm pointing that out is because any of the Necron technology areas are normally painted in a ridiculously bright silver, so that we can tell them apart from the rest of the Ork tech that is more rusted, bronze and that sort of tone. As is generally normal for this channel, we will be starting off with a black to white zenithal prime. However, we are going to be enhancing this a little bit by grabbing a very pale grey and then using this and a reasonably sized brush to dry brush across the model, picking out any raised areas that the spray may have missed. This dry brush is going to give us a nice breakdown of sections as well as some quick edge highlighting, especially on those areas which are predominantly black because they didn't get hit by the white zenithal. So we're able to pick out all of those areas, making sure the raised underneaths still have a little bit of highlight. That highlight will be important for later, but once we've applied that dry brush across the model, we can then reinforce the brightest areas. And this is going to be naturally brighter than our previous step. And we're going to achieve that by grabbing a white and thinning it down. This thinned white can then be applied across all of the brightest raised areas. Whether this is skin, fabric or metal, we can give all of these a nice clean white top coat. This sets us up perfectly for some contrast paints. For the skin, we are going for red skin, so naturally need a red, and we are going to be taking a very bright and bold contrast red, applying this slightly thinned across all of the model's skin. This white top coat is another reason that we wanted to do that dry brush earlier. Mainly what we're now going to end up with is a consistent gradient across the model, going from the black through the grey up to the white. And we are able to make sure that we've got relative consistent lighting across all of the models. There are a few other areas that we need to lay down some contrast on. The easiest one is to take all of the leathers, ropes and bandages across the model, which we're going to be painting in a brown contrast, helping to make these areas settle into the background and not draw as much attention. We do, however, need to remember to keep some of the large fabric sections free from this brown, as the primary colour for our orcs is a yellow, for richness of the orc clan, demonstrating how rich they are with all their Necron teeth. Here, we are using a very bright yellow contrast to give us a bright punch of colour for the army. We're just about to jump onto our metals, and in order to do that we need to apply a base coat because it's slightly annoying to go straight over our zenithal. And what we're going to do is apply a flesh contrast in order to get that nice rich base. We will take a metallic bronze and then apply this as a heavy overbrush. This will pick out most of the areas, but leave the recesses non-metal, which is why we wanted to make sure we added that layer of flesh prior, meaning that we don't have bright recesses. Then all we need to do is grab a big pot of camo green wash. And I really like this wash for making everything recess shaded, as well as looking dirty and worn. We will be applying a thick coat of this across the entirety of the model, hitting every surface, but making sure that we mop up any pooling so that we're able to get a really quick result. And that, for the first round of painting, gives us these red Necroks. And it's worth pointing out that we haven't gone in and done any of the minor details. Things like the teeth or claws or anything like eyes. We could do that on top of what we've done, but for a Horde army, we've managed to get the main bulk of all of the details done really quickly, so that you can see how it's come out, and we can just build on this with things like teeth and claws in our own schemes as we progress. Overall, these models took around an hour to an hour and a half to paint up, and it's worth saying that while there are details that we could go on and push, so the teeth and the eyes and things like that, it was a decent outcome for the amount of time that we put in. So what I want to go over now is another option that took a little bit longer and gives us a similar but slightly upscaled outcome. Kicking off the second method, we will need to grab some more contrast. But this time we will be using some thin blue contrast which we're going to apply to all of the recesses and shadows. This is a nice and quick method, just going around and giving a coat to these darker areas. Once that blue is dry, we then need to add some overall highlights to the raised areas, even those in a shadowy area. And to do this, we can grab a highlight color. We're going to be using a very pale pink and then apply quite a heavy dry brush, focusing more on the raised surfaces. Then, similar to before, what we want to do is thin down a bright red contrast and then use this across all of the skin areas, going over that past work. Doing this pre-work will give us a nice set of coloured shadows. The main reason here is that as opposed to going in and doing something over black, which is just going to desaturate and make it essentially a black shadow, by having this blue, it's going to bring that red tone down to a purple, giving us some nice colour nuance in those shadows. But now that we've tackled the shadows, what we need to do is go and push those highlights a little bit further. We can start to wrap up the skin on our collection of orcs by taking the brightest, boldest red paint that we have and then thinning this down and applying it as a highlight across all of those main bright surfaces. This would be similar to the highlight we did earlier in the pure white on the other method. We can then harmonize all of this past work in an application of a dark red wash over all of the skin sections. This will also help to fill out any minor gaps that we may have missed if we were painting with haste. We can then lay down some base coats across the various other areas on the model. In this case, we gave all of the metal areas a base of a dark brown contrast. Moving across to our yellow fabrics, we are going to be doing something similar here. We're doing a multi-stage process which will be started by a thin application of a pink into all of the recesses and shadows of the fabrics, just like we did with the blue earlier. Then we can take a medium bright yellow contrast and we're going to use this slightly thinned down to go over all of the fabric areas that we want yellow. This will naturally tint the bright white surfaces yellow, but will also turn our now pink shadows into a warm orange tone. From there, we're able to start to build up some more highlights at will. We are going to be building up first with a very pale yellow, picking out the brightest, most raised edges in a semi-broad fashion. Once we've lined out all of our highlights with the yellow, we can then come in and reinforce this with some final highlights using an off-white. With our edges all picked out, we are then going to grow and highlight the brightest edges and harmonize all of our work by simply grabbing a bright yellow contrast, the same one as we used on the first scheme, and then applying this thinned over all of our past work, helping to match and blend those transitions. Now, there's a couple of elements like the brown leathers that we're not actually going to cover in much detail. I will tell you how it's done naturally, but I'm not going to dedicate a whole section to it. Essentially, what we did was start off with a relatively orange brown and applied that as a base coat across all of those sections before making up a mix using our pale pink from earlier and that base coat, and then applying a relatively heavy overbrush. That overbrush was designed to pick out the most raised and damaged areas on the model and was generally for speed because we don't really want to be focusing on these more muted areas. We also went around and painted various elements of the orcs in a blue, and that's mainly for lore purposes. Essentially, the Necrons used blue energy and were silver, which is why we use silver for the Necron technology parts and blue for any of the energy. Then we've got naturally the yellow for the orcs, which is their proudness of how rich they are from all their Necron technology, as well as the red orc skin. Moving on to the metals, which have already been based in a dark brown contrast, this is going to essentially act as the base for our next steps, which is where we're going to take a golden bronze, and we can overbrush this across the various metal parts. Then we need to come in and add some variation and a little bit of highlight. And in order to do that, we can take a silver, and we're going to apply this silver in a couple of ways. The first application is going to be any of the areas that we do want to be bronze. We're going to go around and apply a light dry brush of the silver in these areas. This will nicely pick out any of the raised edges while leaving the corners and relatively large panels still in that bronze to matte brown transition. The other option that we're going to come in and apply is a consistent total coat of silver across set areas. we can then apply an optional stage to the recessed shade, giving everything a nice quick coat of a black wash, and using this across all areas that we've painted, making sure to mop up any pooling so that we have a nice quick line of separation on all of our sections. After all that, we are left with this collection of boys. Now, can you tell me which ones are painted from the first method, which ones are painted from the second method? Naturally, we can also go through and mix and match different parts of this. There's a lot of different ways that we've painted different things. So if there's a way of preference, we can go in and do those as well. Now, here are some photos of those models mounted on our unpainted stomper, which is what we're going to be working on in a few videos time. Getting that massive mega stomper painted. And if you haven't seen how we built the mega stomper, why not check out that video here? Otherwise, you're going to need to subscribe so that we can see you next time.